Attention BART riders.
Hey, San Francisco, I'm Ben Kaplan, and this is the podcast where we define who we are and who we want to be.
We are diverse.
We are innovative.
We are inclusive.
We are change makers.
Problem solvers.
Activists.
Leaders.
Citizens.
We are open-minded.
Optimistic.
There's hope for a better tomorrow. And you gotta give them hope.
This is the podcast that's more than a podcast.
San Francisco, they are the world champion.
We are San Francisco. Hey, San Francisco. Today is another episode in the Meet the 2024 Candidates series. I'm chatting with Brooke Jenkins, who is currently serving as San Francisco's District Attorney. Brooke became the interim District Attorney back in 2022 after the recall of her predecessor, Chesa Boudin. She was appointed by Mayor London Breed, then won election later that year, and she's running for re-election in November of this year. So, Brooke, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, you come into the office in unusual circumstances. There aren't a lot of district attorney recalls in our history. To give people a sense, what is the first thing you do to kind of restructure the office? I know there's lawyers who are fired, there's lawyers who are hired. What changes at that point?
Yes, we had never had a DA recall. I don't know that many people had ever seen that happen in their lifetime anywhere. And so I came in at a time when not only the city was in crisis, but our office was in crisis. We had a management team that was almost completely comprised of career-long public defenders. So I had to completely overhaul that structure. I had to make sure that we had experienced prosecutors at the helm of the office running the day-to-day operations and guiding lawyers in how to responsibly prosecute cases. I also had to make sure that everybody who was on the team, regardless of whether you were paralegal, a victim advocate, an investigator, no matter what your role was, that you were committed to public safety and doing our job the right way, actually serving the city in the function that we are supposed to serve. And so much of my priority when I took over was, yes, I had to release people, and I released 15 people in the first week. And then we had a number of people just voluntarily leave who, were not on board with sort of the new administration, and then quickly try to hire experienced prosecutors back to both manage the office and try cases.
And what was the difference when you have like a management structure in the DA's office that's more, from people who've spent their life as a public defender versus a prosecutor? What is the difference for those of us who aren't lawyers?
I actually volunteered in the public defender's office before I came over to the DA's office. So I'm going to tell you what I believe from that experience, which is when you are a public defender, your sole responsibility and thought process is what is best for your client. So what is best for the person charged with the crime. And overwhelmingly, the thought process of what is best is that they be released, that the case be dismissed and go away, and that they be free, right? And not bound by the criminal justice system. When you are a prosecutor, you have a different outlook. Your outlook should be threefold. It should be, what does justice look like for the victim? What does that look like? Is it, incarceration? Is it treatment? What is it that we believe will ultimately provide justice to that victim? We have to take into consideration what is just and fair and proportional to the defendant, right? We shouldn't be too harsh. We shouldn't be too lenient. We should make sure that we are looking at what brought them into the system and route them down the off-ramp that they need in order to rehabilitate themselves. And then we have to consider public safety as a whole for society. We have to keep in mind that whatever decisions we make need to be what we believe is best overall for the general public safety atmosphere. And so it's very difficult when you've been a public defender for 15 or 20 years and you've only thought about what is best for your client to then
change
put on
some
a
of those
different
patterns
hat.
of how you think about things in a different role. And one of the biggest debates, because Chesa Boudin was, and he's been on the show, and he was a proponent of a lot of criminal justice reform. A lot of people in San Francisco support that idea. But is it possible to do that at the same time that we really are needing to clean up our streets and there's a lot of issue? Like, can you do that simultaneously, or should there be an order in it? Meaning, like, we've got to get our foundation on our streets solid, and then we can do other things. Like, what is your feeling on that? Because I know you've said you support criminal justice reform also.
I absolutely support criminal justice reform. And again, I try to remind people that most of the people disadvantaged by the system are of my background, right? I'm a Black and Latina woman. And so those are the people who have overwhelmingly been disadvantaged in this system. So I don't come from this from having had to learn about the need for reform in a book. I'm talking to you about what my family, my friends, people around me have experienced in this system that's been unfair. I do believe we can balance both of those interests at the same time, that we can accomplish achieving them both at the same time. But you have to be responsible in the way that you implement reform. It can't be at the expense of public safety. Everything that we do on the reform side has to always keep in mind that our first and primary responsibility is safety. And so anything that we implement needs to be in a fashion that won't undermine that mission. I have, since I took over, been very invested in reforming this system, both from a legislative standpoint, both from a policy standpoint. But I also believe that prevention and intervention work should be the full should be a part of any reform strategy, right? We have to be investing on the front end so that people don't commit crime on the back ends of their lives. And the DA's office has never really had a footprint in that type of work. And so that's sort of the space where I have invested most of our resources into reforming things.
So what is the life of a district attorney like in a major city? I mean, you had a fast rise in the DA's office. What does your week look like? What are your activities? Who are you meeting with?
I always wondered about what the DAs I worked for did all day. Now I know that it is a great deal of community engagement. You have to make yourself accessible to the public. They want to know what you are doing to keep them safe. They want to be reassured that you are at the forefront of addressing issues that are of most concern to them. Right now, of course, I came in at a time when public safety was the top concern of almost every San Franciscan, business owner, resident, you name it, even visitors of San Francisco. And so I have had to spend a lot of my days really engaging in a dialogue with various stakeholders, groups, to make sure that...
So Brooke, are you a politician now? Is that what you're saying? Do you consider yourself a politician?
Yes, I have to consider myself that way. I do miss the courtroom. I no longer feel sort of like a lawyer because I don't get to go to court anymore. But I sometimes feel like a professor. Because I have to go out and explain to people how the criminal justice system works, why, certain cases get handled a certain way, make sure that people understand that I see and I hear them and explain to them what we are doing to address their concern, be it auto burglary or be it they have a concern about shootings in their neighborhoods, right? From the lowest level crime up to the most serious. And for that reason, I still feel like an advocate for victims in the same way that I was when I was a prosecutor. But day to day, I still do work out. That's how I start every morning. After my kids get off to school, I head to the gym because you do have to have some self-care when you give so much to others.
Sure, of course. And you have an interesting background in the DA's office when you were an assistant district attorney. I mean, you spent time in hate crimes unit. You spent time in, I think, was it like sexual assault unit? Ended up in very high profile, the homicide unit. What did that teach you now in each of those units or experiences that influences you as district attorney?
You really do fully understand what victims need from our office. Victims who are the most vulnerable, the most traumatized, and what we have an obligation to deliver to them. We are their sole voice in that system, right, of justice. If we don't help them tell their story, then they have no one who will help them do that. If we don't fight for justice, that is a trauma that they have to carry the rest of their lives and feel like nobody helped them. And so I think that is difficult to do as a DA when you've never done this job. And San Francisco has had more than one DA who had never prosecuted a case. And I don't think fully understood what it means to have that responsibility of delivering that justice to a victim. The other thing is it informs me of how to consider evidence, right? When we are trying to look at certain cases and decide, is this a case we dismiss? Is this a case we charge? Of course, I don't look at every case, but there have been very serious cases that do get discussed with me. And I get to view them from the lens of somebody who has tried, right, the most complex cases that our office handles. And I don't have to just defer to what other lawyers are telling me is the case. I can call upon my experience. And I think that is very unique.
Well, and how does that work with, like, how many cases does the DA's office is overseeing at any one time, and how many reach your desk?
So we handle thousands of cases. Even just last year alone for drug dealing, we received and filed over 1,000 cases in a year just for drug dealing. So imagine when you add in every other type of crime there is. So only a small, tiny fraction come up to my office. It's generally the more serious cases, homicides, rapes. Right now, some of, a handful of maybe cases involving attacks on our Asian seniors. More very, very serious cases like that will advance to me either for settlement discussions, whether or not I will approve a plea offer that's being made, whether a lawyer sees that, evidence has fallen apart and we need to dismiss. And so we will discuss whether or not I agree with the position that they're taking, and I'll weigh in.
Well, and when you originally ran for the office after you were appointed, one of your key tenets was better sort of relationships with local, state, national law enforcement. That was a priority for you. What has changed in the past couple of years on that front? Have things changed in terms of the relationship of DA's office to law enforcement?
Things have changed tremendously on that front. Let's start with SFPD. I mean, the relationship between SFPD and my office when I took over was antagonistic. I mean, it wasn't even non-existent. It was that they were at odds with each other. And for understandable reasons, given the way the previous DA carried himself. But even in administrations prior to that, there was a breakdown. There was really no relationship between Gascon and SFPD. Kamala Harris had a very well-known situation involving a police officer that was murdered that deteriorated her relationship with SFPD. So this was a long road of us getting to a point where we could work together. And so
it truly didn't feel like previously, like you're on the same team. It's like we're on different teams looking out for our interests. That's how you would describe it previously? As
a line attorney, you felt fine. But what you knew was that the backdrop was that the two agencies functioned very separately. There wasn't a lot of coordination at the top. At the point at which Chesa took over, there was zero coordination. And so, yes, you feel that and you understand what impact that has on the way we can best do our work. And so for me, it was about establishing that we were going to have a partnership, hitting the reset button. Let's start from scratch. And I had a head start because I had worked with a lot of cops over the years. So they knew the quality of my work and what my commitment was. But it was opening back up that partnership dialogue, because at the end of the day, the police can make an arrest, but if they don't bring us the evidence that we need in current time to successfully prosecute, then the arrest is meaningless. And over time, the expectation of jurors has changed, and we can't expect them to know that. We have to be able to communicate that to them, that what was good enough back in 1990 when you started your career, experienced police officer, doesn't suffice for a jury that now is in the tech world. We have a lot of tech workers who want surveillance video, and they want all of these technological things in front of them to make an informed decision. And so, hey, now we need to tell you what was good enough back then. We need you to collect more, gather more. And you have to be able to discuss that. The other thing that was non-existent was any partnership on the federal level, on the state level. That wasn't going on. And so now we are not only at the table with state and federal law enforcement agencies, but we have a coordinated strategy on how to address, for right now, one of the most pressing issues in our city, which is drug dealing. And I've asked police officers and others who have been in law enforcement for some of them 30 years, have you ever seen a partnership on this scale before between the U.S. Attorney's Office, the DEA, right, police, my office? No, that's their answer. No, but that's where we are now.
I see. Well, and you mentioned surveillance, and we had a ballot measure on the March ballot, Proposition E, which in part had more police powers. It dealt with that. One of the interesting things that I didn't realize, and I'm not a legal expert, but the San Francisco Bar Association came out against that proposition, which of course passed, and they raised this issue. It's a legal issue. I'd love for you to comment on of like, could these surveillance methods hold up in court? That there was an issue in whether, let's say you had the greater, surveillance or drone footage or other things, that there was issues on could a conviction actually be made? That was raised. I don't know if that's accurate or inaccurate. What is your response to that, saying, hey, even if we have these, it could hinder the ability to prosecute criminals?
I would fundamentally disagree, and it's always on a case-by-case basis anyway. Every time we walk into court with a piece of evidence, we have to lay a foundation for why that evidence is reliable, right, to a judge and to before we're allowed to present it to a jury. We have to authenticate it to make sure that it is in fact the footage, that captured our incident. Not every piece of surveillance video is all that helpful. Depends on the quality. It depends on all sorts of things, right? Was it nighttime? Was it daytime? And so at the end of the day, we will always have to make that case-by-case presentation to ask that it be admissible. But more is always better. We always want to be making sure that we make every effort to arrest the right person. So much of what surveillance evidence allows is for us to prove identity of the suspect, right? So that nobody is dealing with, hopefully, false convictions or juries holding responsible the wrong person. They should be able to look at something, hopefully, and see, yes, the person who committed this is, in fact, the person sitting in front of us. And so for me, one, it assists in catching those who are committing these crimes. But then on the back end, it helps us reassure ourselves and our jurors that we, in fact, are prosecuting the correct person and for the specific crime that they committed and not something more or something less.
Well, and do you think the use of technology could be expanded? Is there more that we could do? I mean, there's an interesting case in India. They are very resource strapped. They don't have, if you think we don't have enough police officers here, they really don't have enough police officers for that size of population. One of the things they've done with surveillance is say, okay, if someone is a repeat offender, we're going to use more like AI technology or other things to identify other cases that person might be related to, because we don't have enough officers to go down and look through books and try to match up people's faces. So they say in India, it's not an invasion of privacy because these are really repeat people and we're just trying to automate looking through a book that takes a lot of time. What is your thoughts on just doing even more with technology and surveillance, particularly if we're in an understaffed police situation?
It can absolutely help us when it comes to situations where we don't have enough human bodies to do these things. But also, we should always want to have an objective of freeing up human beings to do more important things like be on the street than sitting behind a desk combing through a computer or through a book. I mean, that should always be our goal. Because at the end of the day, the more police we have out on the street, the more they can address concerns, the more they can serve as a deterrent, the more community policing they can engage in. They can create relationships with people in the communities for which they serve, which are important. And so we should always, just like we do in any other industry, try to automate as much as we can, right? As long as it's not taking away jobs, right? So there's a debate if you talk about self-checkouts. I don't want to go there. But where we still need human beings to serve that function, but where we can limit how much time that they spend doing administrative tasks. And so I would fundamentally agree. We have to be a city that moves in that direction. We are in Silicon Valley. There's no reason why we shouldn't be moving in that direction. And I believe there's ways we can do it without us all handing over our privacy completely.
Well, and do you think when you came into office that the police department, it was reported that they were just willing to send over more enforcement, more over cases? When Chesa was on the show, he said, they didn't send me enough cases. They didn't send me enough things. I was limited.
Police stopped making arrests when I was district attorney and started working harder under the new administration.
Do you think the police kind of stepped up their activity once you came in office? Is that true?
I think they always wanted to do their jobs. I don't think any police officer decided in 2019 when he was elected that they just were going to throw their hands up and no longer want to enforce laws, right? That's not how they're built. They want to do their jobs. But I think what we saw was morale go down into the toilet because they felt as though the work that they were doing wasn't having any impact once it got to the DA's office. And so I think they had a renewed energy when I took over that their work wouldn't go to waste. And of course, I went around to each police station and talked with officers and said, look, we're here to be a good partner. We want to make this city safe. We can't do it without you. So let's all step up our game and do this at the highest level and provide what San Francisco needs and deserves. And so, yes, has that translated into more cases? Absolutely. When you have a functioning partnership, people thrive in their work, like in any environment, right? And so we have seen, again, drug dealing is one of the things that we track most closely. They've almost doubled the number of cases that they've submitted to our office since I took over. And when I say doubled, that's in the hundreds. Not 50 or 50 additional cases. That's 450 additional cases in a year than what they were bringing before. And so they have really stepped up. And as I see and talk to police officers, they tell me that they feel reinvigorated because they see the fruits of their labor paying off.
Well, and one of the things that it's been interesting to look at, we have an organization called We like to look at a lot of data. We have a lot of volunteer data scientists and data analysts who help us with that. And when you look at the SFPD clearance rates, essentially like the cases that are solved, they're kind of low just from a layman's point of view, right? Like 1 out of 5 robberies and rapes currently rates are solved. 1 out of 8 burglaries, 1 out of 16 instances of motor vehicle theft. What do we need to do to get those numbers higher?
So it depends on the type of case, what will help. When it comes to auto burglary and auto theft, we need more police. A big problem with solving those cases is that nobody sees the crime, right? Auto burglary generally happens in a matter of seconds. Usually it's when people are not around. They are professional crews. This is what they do for a living. They have the tools they need. They have getaway drivers. They have an operation plan. They scout where to go do this. They are prepared, right, to go out and make their money. And so we have to have police stationed in certain places to function as a deterrent and to see license plates, to see suspects, to pursue suspects. And if they're not there, they can't do that. And generally, most of us are not in a position to do that for them, right? And so that is a big problem with clearance rates in those types of crimes. Retail theft is now becoming one just like that. Well, when I was prosecuting retail theft, stores used to civilian detain thieves, meaning security guards or even store employees would grab the person as they were about to walk out of the store with the items, put them in handcuffs and tie them and handcuff them to a bench in the back of the store, call the police. Police would show up and take over. They don't do that anymore. So now people just walk out and half of them are masked. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why at that point it's very difficult to then trace who that was and what they took. And so you're going to see lower clearance rates because of that. Robbery and rape, a little bit of a different story. Of course, robbery can be deterred by the presence of police. But those two units, those two crimes have investigative units dedicated to them. But again, limited staff. We will always have a limited number of staff who conduct those investigations. That's where surveillance video can be more handy when it comes to investigating robbery and other license plate readers, those types of technology, in order to better sort of be able to identify who suspects are, identify getaway cars, track those cars as they come in and out of our city and go to other jurisdictions. Rape is a more complicated crime. And the issue there is generally it's something that only happens in a private space between two people. And more often than not, the perpetrators are known to the victim, which is, probably not what most people would think, but it is. And so we are generally up against not always having corroborating evidence for what a victim is saying. So it may not even be that SFPD can't identify the suspect. They often can. It's whether or not they have enough to then substantiate that the act occurred and therefore probable cause to arrest. So it's a little bit different.
And what about all of the cases? There was headlines recently, I think, maybe back in January, about a lot of cases being dismissed that were very old, that were just kind of caught in the legal system. There's not enough throughput. And there was a little bit of a sense of kind of blame game of who is it the court's fault they didn't get this through? Is it the DA's fault for not having enough evidence to get these through? What should people and residents understand about just cases being dismissed, particularly ones that have lasted for years?
Oh, thank you for asking this question, because there is a common misperception that delays in cases are the result of lazy prosecutors. And that could not be further from the truth. The Constitution only affords a criminal defendant with a speedy trial right. Victims don't get that. The DA's office doesn't get that right. The U.S. Constitution determined that the only person who gets to determine the speed of the case is the person charged with the crime. And so what you see happen is defendants, at the advising of their attorneys, refuse to assert that speedy trial right. And you would say, well, why would they do that? Wouldn't they want the case resolved sooner? Well, you have to imagine, as years pass by, what that means for the difficulty of our prosecutions. We have victims who get frustrated, who decide they don't want to be participants in the process anymore. We lose track of witnesses over time. Phone numbers change. People move. People become disengaged. Some of our witnesses are unhoused. Imagine trying to track them down, right? 5 years later. And so defendants know this. Their attorneys know this. And so they have a self-interest in delaying.
So you think this is like an actual strategy from defense as opposed to just the courts, kind of being inefficient and bureaucratic and can't get it through, that it's actually a defense strategy?
It is absolutely a defense strategy. Recently, we just resolved a case that was 13 years old, I believe. It was a sexual assault case, a series of sexual assaults with multiple victims. And on the jail recordings, the defendant was on the phone with someone else saying, I am going to push this case out because I believe that it will frustrate the victims and they won't cooperate anymore. It's not in my interest to speed this trial up. And that case sat for 13 years in that courthouse. We have to have judges who will really force the hand of defense lawyers to say, no longer are we going to grant continuances where there's not good cause for that continuance, right? There's a legal term called good cause that means you have to demonstrate that there's an actual basis for your request to continue a case. You can't just come in and willy-nilly say, right, we're not ready. Let's just keep pushing this out. And I've advised my lawyers, we're not going to sit on our hands and be complicit in this by not objecting, right? Oftentimes, yes, it's easy as prosecutors to say, well, then if that case isn't right on a fast track, then I'll prioritize the ones that are. We have to also walk in and say, we won't stand by and sit on our hands while defense lawyers delay cases for years without standing up and asserting the victim's voice in the process to say, Judge, push this along.
Well, and you bring up the point of judges. In the recent March election, there were a couple of judges on the ballot, which doesn't always happen, Superior Court judges. The challengers ran kind of robust campaigns, did not win. What is the role of judges in all of this? Do residents who want, things to be tougher on crime have a right to complain about the judges?
Judges should be independent. They should be judicially neutral, right? They should enter into a case, into a courtroom and evaluate a case neutrally. Unfortunately, they're humans. And with being human, that means you carry in life experience and you look at the world through a certain lens. Many of our judges used to be defense lawyers, criminal defense lawyers. Some used to be prosecutors. And so they're coming in with a perspective based on the lens for which they see the world, right? And the experiences that they've had. They bring ideology into it.
And we're in a famously progressive liberal city. Do you feel that as a whole, judges in our city sort of bring that life experience of sort of, a progressive perspective, which a lot of people may appreciate or like, but maybe don't want that in a judge? Do you think that's true here?
Yes, I think we have an overwhelming number of judges who have sort of that more have more of a viewpoint that would align, against the prosecution. And again, it's not to say they should not be judges, but when you put on the robe and you walk in the courtroom, just like we tell jurors, you're supposed to leave that behind, right? You're supposed to come in and set that aside and look at the evidence and the law and evaluate it independent of your experience, ideology, whatever it
That's
might
sort
be.
of the definition of a judge.
Correct.
But you don't think judges are doing this?
That does not happen in the Hall of Justice here in San Francisco. And so that is a part of the problem. And I know that folks in the courthouse have been upset that I speak up about what's going on, but I believe that the public is entitled to know what decisions are being made in our courthouse. At the end of the day, they don't appoint themselves. They're appointed by our governors, right? We are allowed to have a voice with our governors about who is being appointed, have them be evaluated a certain way. And then if people are not satisfied, there's a democratic process in place for Superior Court judges to choose something different. And that's okay. That is fine. This isn't about tough on crime, soft on crime. Again, it's about neutrality. And we still have to have a system of justice that holds people accountable, whether it means sending them to prison or not. I need them to hold people accountable to their treatment programs, right? I want people to succeed when they're trying to get clean and get into recovery. I want people to be able to manage their mental illness. And the only way to do that is if a judge, in partnership with both sides, comes together and says, if somebody falls off the wagon, I'm going to force them to get back on, right? Otherwise, if we keep having issues, then I've got to send you a different way. But what's been happening is that judges are saying, you know what, it's okay if you fall off the wagon and I'll just leave you off and I'll still give you the benefit of the bargain. That doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help us as a society with public safety, and it doesn't help that individual who needed to get clean, and now you're allowing to stay on drugs.
Well, and what do you think the effect of the March election will be on judges? What I mean is that the two incumbent judges, they retain their seats. They won fairly handily in that election. But of course, they didn't expect to have challengers. It forced them to go out and have meetings and speak to people and maybe do something differently. Do you think that will have an effect either on saying, we're safe, we're incumbent judges, or, we better be careful of what we do because we might get a challenger if we, if are not objective or don't reflect the will of the people?
It's hard to say what the impact of that election is going to be. I mean, this isn't the first time we've had judges be challenged. We had 4 judges when I was a younger prosecutor be challenged by public defenders, 4 public defenders who decided to run against them. So this isn't completely new territory for them. My only desire out of all of this is that, again, we get to a place of neutrality, that public safety be a consideration in the Hall of Justice as it's supposed to be. Judges are supposed to consider public safety in their analysis of the decisions that they make with respect to sentencing, with respect to custody status at the beginning of a case. And I just hope that they are able to take into consideration what is best for this city in the decisions that they make as they are obligated to.
Well, and it really came to head recently. A lot of us in the Asian community were very concerned about really a 94-year-old woman who was stabbed back in 2021 on Peng Taylor. And the person who did this to her received 5 years probation. I think you were asking for, 12 years in prison. Do people have a right when they see these cases come out to be like, do actions not have consequences anymore? It seems like, multiple stabbings of an elderly woman is a horrendous thing. And even though this person, has mental health issues, it looks like, do people have a right to be outraged about that?
People absolutely have a right to be outraged. I mean, we're entitled to our opinions about the things that happen, decisions that get made. Sometimes the outrage is directed at me as the DA. Sometimes it's directed at other people. In this particular situation, it was directed towards the part of the system that gave that rendered that decision. I want to first preface this by saying, do I believe that outrage has to have boundaries? Yes, it does. And to the extent that this judge has expressed that she has received death threats, inappropriate, illegal, out of bounds, right? If that's true. But civic outrage is normal. We protest all the time about all sorts of things, right? People have been on the front steps of the Supreme Court of the United States protesting the ruling in Roe v. Wade, right? They're entitled to those free speech rights. And so what we have to be able to express and demand is, again, that our criminal justice system function in a way that is responsible. And when we talk about somebody that violent, right, and really the most vulnerable type of victim you will ever see, other than
94-year-old woman,
other than a child. I mean, you get no more defenseless than a 94-year-old woman. We want to make sure that we do as a system what we need to protect people. We've
chatted before that this was a retired judge. I didn't realize retired judges come back and rule in like really important cases like that. But the circumstances of a judge, this would not be a judge that would be, up for re-election, would have other considerations. Does that factor in? Sometimes people don't realize that little things like that can affect an outcome and something that a lot of people care about.
Yes, of course. I mean, when you're talking about retired judges who come and visit the courthouse to settle cases or to sit and do hearings, they don't have to have those same considerations that the other judges do. And so they have a bit more personal freedom when it comes to, any backlash that could result from a decision that people disagree with. And so, are they helpful? Absolutely. We need them to sometimes come in and fill in for judges who are on vacation.
That just helps get throughput and cases through, so you need retired judges to help out.
And it's very normal that those judges come back and be used in that fashion. Again, I don't care what the situation is. I just want to make sure that, we always stand in advocacy for justice for victims, what's just and proportional to a defendant, and what is best for public safety in San Francisco. And for that reason, I spoke up.
Okay. Well, and what about just throughput in the system? One of the maybe criticisms or critiques from those on the left that says, okay, if you start, criminalizing low-level offenses or low-level drug offenses or drug use, that it's going to slow down our system and take away from the really big, important cases like violent attacks.
We're asking them to do many, many things that they are not trained for. And inevitably, that comes at a cost. And the problem is it's coming at a cost to their core basic function: solving burglaries, solving robberies, solving rapes. They're not doing those basic jobs well because we've distracted them with all these other things that they simply don't have the tools to address.
Do you think there is a valid argument that like if we prosecute too many things, then the big stuff gets away?
Not at all. So first of all, we have an office set up in a way that people who handle the lower level crimes are in a separate unit from those who handle violent crime. We're not taking away from our violent crime units in order to bolster our misdemeanor unit. Those are two separate, things. In the criminal justice system, so in the courthouse has to manage its own efficiency. What we cannot do is decide that we are going to not enforce laws for the sake of helping our courthouse manage its calendars. That can't be the case, right? My job is to enforce all laws in the city and county of San Francisco. I'm not a legislator. I don't get to decriminalize certain things because I don't like the crime on the books. I, have an ideological disagreement with the crime on the books, or otherwise feel like my office has too much work to do. I have to enforce all laws because that is my job. And the courthouse has to make sure that whatever cases come through it, that they can manage it effectively, right? When it comes to low-level crime, the problem in San Francisco is the volume of it. Of course, we would love to focus all of our attention on robberies and rapes and murders. But when you talk about a city right now that's overrun with people using drugs on our streets, in certain areas where children are having to walk by and see that, where the resulting behavior, in addition to being under the influence that comes from it, public defecation, exacerbating people's mental health problems who have mental illness, violent behavior sometimes that comes out of people who are under the influence. We have to help them address that underlying substance abuse problem. Do I wish that it could be dealt with outside of my lane, so outside of the criminal justice system? Yes, I do. But sometimes this is the only thing that will sort of propel folks into getting the help they need.
Well, and one of the reforms you've done is sort of, I think, introduce what's called colloquially a bundling process for in terms of someone who's cited multiple times for public drug use. I think originally it started, I believe, about 5 instances of this. Yeah. You reduced it to 2 instances of this, and they get routed to this community justice center. Has that been effective? Like you said, it seems like it's so pervasive. Has that made a difference, a sort of bundling of citations and trying to direct people to a place to help?
So far, it has not been very effective. I'm going to be honest and transparent. Again, a part of the issue is once you get there, what happens? Almost all of these people are released from custody within hours of their arrest. When you're talking about somebody who is dealing with substance abuse, they do what? They immediately, after a few hours, especially if you're addicted to fentanyl, go get high again. And so we can't expect them to acknowledge a court date when their sole focus in life at this point is their next high. And so we have to, as a system, figure out something better, right? To keep them engaged in the court process. The other thing is, again, to the extent that people do show up, there has to be accountability within our treatment courts. And that is fundamentally lacking right now. And so I have been very open that I don't see this as moving the ball the way that I wished it would from the outset. And so I've really been pushing on the public health side of this to figure out how our city gets better interventions before people end up in the system.
Well, and I think one aspect of sort of the Community Justice Center as a whole is really, there's a second change that you made related to that, which almost changes the nature of the center. And that is a lot of people who were charged with distributing or dealing fentanyl would end up at the Community Justice Center. You rescinded a lot of sort of plea deals you felt were too lenient, redirected people away from that. Has that been effective?
That has been effective. So I wasn't able to remove people that CHASA had already allowed in there. CHASA's administration had allowed in. But what I would do was cut off the pipeline. And so no longer are drug dealers allowed into that treatment court. Do we have people who, again, we know are substance abuse users who might hold for a dealer? Yes, that might be treated differently. It could be. If we think it's appropriate. But for those who are simply dealing, most of whom do not have a substance abuse issue, they no longer go to that court.
Well, and what about the argument people say is that if you take a lot of action on low-level drug dealers, they just get replaced. It's not the high-level person who's really the person responsible who's out there on the streets, but they're just going to get someone else. Or do you think you can make a difference by making things tougher and more severe for especially those who are dealing drugs?
I absolutely think we can make a difference. I think we are making a difference. And I always question people who say that and ask them, so what do you think we should do? Throw up our hands and allow them to deal? I mean, is that the solution, that we simply don't enforce drug dealing laws? To which I never get a response of yes, that's the solution. I think to the extent that we enforce our laws, it can function as a deterrent. People have to believe there's a consequence. When you teach them that there is no consequence, well, then what do? They pass along that information to others, and the problem becomes more pervasive, which is what was happening. Everything going outbound was San Francisco is a safe place to deal drugs. Nothing will happen to you. And so we saw one dealer turn into 5 turn into 15 turn into 30 on block by block locations. Now the message is spreading. San Francisco is not a safe location to deal your drugs anymore. And so we have seen the number of dealers out during the day reduce considerably. Now, do we still have a problem of them coming out at night? Absolutely. That means we then have to shift. Their behavior shifts. Ours as law enforcement shifts. But they are learning slowly but surely that this isn't the place that's so comfortable for them anymore. And so that then deters, right, how many people continue to come here to deal. And it allows us to hone in on those repeat offenders who keep getting caught for it.
Well, and you mentioned dealing at night. I mean, one mayoral candidate, Mark Farrell, I think came out and said he wants to close down like sort of dysfunctional parks that have this problem, maybe certain areas of sort of town central areas. Do you actually support closing down areas that are high drug areas, especially at night?
I mean, I certainly believe, again, we have to use every tool in our toolbook to assist us in this process, right? To the extent that public parks like UN Plaza have closing hours, then yes, of course we should enforce that to keep people out of those spaces. I think we have to be creative in a number of ways to deal with this issue. Never did I think that the minute I got into office, people would just run off and stop selling drugs. At the end of the day, That will never happen. We'll always have a drug market somewhere because that's just what happens in society. But we have to curb as much of it as we can. And doing that right now means using every available tool in our tool belt to make it more difficult for them to set up shop.
And finally, on property crime, to me, I looked at the FBI came out with recent numbers on sort of comparing police departments all across the U.S. I think San Francisco on property crime was ranking in the top 5 per capita. And I would argue that it's one of the issues that causes the most sort of like demoralization among residents, not because property crime is the most serious issue, but it's because unchecked, feeling like, why even bother reporting it, is demoralizing. Do you agree with that or not, that property crime, while not a high-level offense, is affecting the attitude or the culture of the city?
I think you're absolutely right. We are a major city, an urban city that has one of the lowest violent crime rates in our country. That is not the issue here. The issue is property crime. Most San Franciscans will tell you, right, that the pressing thing on their mind is how many times their car has been broken into. If they're a small business owner, how many times their small business has been vandalized or broken into. And so we have to treat that for the problem that it is. Back in, I think, 2018, we were at our highest point in auto burglaries. Reported auto burglaries were at over 30,000 in a year back then. I mean, that's just what was reported. So really, that was probably closer to 40,000 in reality. So that's not just impacting folks who live here. It's impacting the people who are coming to visit, because overwhelmingly they choose tourist locations
which is affecting the story of people going back home and saying, correct. Oh, are you okay in San Francisco? How you doing? That kind of the annoying thing San Franciscans experience when they talk to others who are not in the city.
Or you go back home and you say, on my last day of the trip, our rental car got broken into, our luggage and my passport was stolen. That's not the place you want to go visit, right? Cross that off your list of cities, right, for your next vacation. And so we can't have that be our reality. We have to address these problems. And I can't make it seem as though, oh, we shouldn't worry about it because it's nonviolent crime. Oh, we can be lenient on that because it's nonviolent crime. We have to address it for what it is. And so my focus, along with the police, has really been not only them deterring the behavior by being more present in areas where auto burglary is more common, but us really drilling down on who these prolific auto burglary crews are. Because to the extent that we can disrupt them and incapacitate their activity, the more we really reduce the number of overall auto burglaries and things like that go on. I mean, you're talking about crews that can go out and commit 20 or 30 of these in a matter of hours every day, right? And so when you can shut that off, it makes a huge difference overall.
So is there hope for the next 2 years? I know sometimes people hear like, oh, it's going to take us 7 years or 10 years or another election cycle to right the ship. If people are impatient and don't want the status quo to stay around, is there hope for the next 2 years?
There absolutely is hope. We have made tremendous progress just in I can't even remember how long I've been in office now, 20 months? I mean, we've made tremendous progress. We have seen most of our categories of crime trend downward in reported crimes. And here's the thing, unlike 3 or 4 years ago, where people were saying, I throw up my hands, I'm not even going to report. Hopefully now they have more trust in the system, to take that time. But the chief and I have been going around telling people each and every day, report, report, report. Please don't hold on to that information. Please don't be complacent. Even if it takes hours, report that crime so that we know what's going on with you in your neighborhood, in your area, at your store. And so I have no reason to believe that people aren't reporting crime right now. And we have seen retail theft reduce dramatically. Auto burglaries have cut in half in the last 6 months. And so the work that we are doing to step up our game is being effective. What we need is for all of us to kind of see this through, right? I have a phenomenal partner in Chief Scott. He wants to do his job. He wants his department to be effective. He cares about this city. And so right now we are working together. You finally, as a city, have, for the first time in a long time, a mayor, a police chief, and a DA who can sit down together and talk about solutions. How long has it been since that's been the case? And so now we finally have momentum, right? We're headed in the right direction. And I assure San Francisco, I'm not going to stop until we get there.
Well, and how's the campaign going? You get to work on all of these really important issues, but then you also have to think about re-election. You're up for re-election in November. Have you started thinking like a candidate again? I know the process has begun. What are you doing now campaign-wise?
Yeah, it's hard to believe that I'm back in another election cycle. It feels like the last one just happened. And for me, it's about, yes, of course, I have to go out and I have to campaign. I have to raise money, right? I have to fundraise. I have to do the outreach. But fundamentally, I have to do this work because the only thing that San Franciscans want right now are results. And so first and foremost, I am dedicated to making sure that we see improvement because the only thing that's going to matter in November is whether that is happening. Yes, I'm in a race now that's opposed. You have
one new candidate, I think Ryan Kojaste, who's actually one of the people you fired. I think, I don't know how often that happens, when you came into office. Was that expected? Was it unexpected? Have you had a chance to sort of assess that?
I always expected I would have an opponent. I don't know that I expected him, but as I sit here now, I do believe that I am the strongest candidate for San Francisco. I have the experience to do this job as a line prosecutor that you need in order to understand what it takes to prove cases. I have renewed the partnerships with our fellow law enforcement agencies that it's going to take to get this mission accomplished. And again, we are seeing the fruits of that labor each and every day. It might be slow, but it's steady.
I want to end on just lightning round, which is just fun questions, get to know you. The hard stuff's over.
All right.
But sometimes people don't know about their DA and their background. We know you're on the Berkeley track and field team.
Yes.
Was it hurdles?
Yes, I ran the 400 hurdles. 400
hurdles. You're a mom also. Are you hurdling things over? Are you an athletic person? What should people know about you, just like kind of personally your background?
Yes, I am very athletic. I grew up playing all sorts of sports my whole life. I still, like I said, work out every morning, but no more running because I'm kind of over that these days. So I do a lot of high intensity interval workouts. The most you get is about 15 seconds rest between reps. You're doing a lot of burpees.
This is good training for being DA.
It gets my mind in the right place to fight crime and San Francisco politics every day. That's for sure.
Okay. Well, and then also you have in your work history, you actually worked at the NCAA, which makes sense to your sports. You were, I think, assistant director of enforcement. What does that experience seems like very different than what you're doing now, but what did that teach you? Did you learn anything from that working at the NCAA?
It's actually very similar work. You were sort of the prosecutors of the NCAA, but you couple that with also being an investigator. So you don't have a different investigator go and investigate the cases or the your charges per se. You go and do that yourself, and then if you gather enough evidence, then you go before the board to present.
Like NCAA rules violations. This
Correct.
Coach was doing illegal recruiting outside of the period, and you're gonna go track
That's
that down.
right. Or back then, because now I feel old. We didn't have NIL, which now allows athletes to make money.
Name, image, and likeness that can make money. I was curious your opinion on this.
Yes, and so back then it was like, were you paying players to come to your university and play football or basketball? And so, times were different back then, and there was a lot of that going on, and that's what we were looking into.
Which is almost like looking into sort of corruption in the NCAA system.
Yes.
We didn't have a chance to talk about this, but it seems like there's so many instances of corruption in people who are high-level officials being, let out in handcuffs. Kind of starts with Mohamed Nuru. It goes from there. But what is, the role of your office and all of that? Do you focus on that, or is there enough other stuff that you've got to deal with that's not a primary focus?
No, that is a very important focus of ours. We are who prosecute on the state level those types of crimes. And so we have a robust public integrity unit in my office that is under our white-collar crime division. And they they've been working around the clock really since I took over. I mean, we've filed a number of cases, very public cases involving city government workers, I should say, in San Francisco, folks associated with government workers in corruption schemes. And so I have to say, it is a top priority for us. We want to make sure that government resources are not being stolen from this city. We're at a point right now where we have a significant deficit, but also it just is a bad look for San Francisco, and it can't be allowed. And so,
which supports this idea of anything goes, or there isn't consequences, or things are mismanaged that sort of affects the culture.
Absolutely. And we can't just hold the little people accountable. We have to make sure that there's, again, accountability across the board for anyone that commits crime in this city. And so, again, I'm really proud of that unit because they've been doing some great work, and their investigations have yielded a number of cases that we filed recently, and it looks like there will be more to come.
What do you do in San Francisco? We know you work out, but is there anything else you do to let off steam? What do you have a frustrating day when you have people coming at you, on the political front? What else do you do in the city to kind of relax and recharge?
So most people know this. I have two kids. They're 4 and 7, a 4-year-old son, a 7-year-old daughter. My daughter is in 3 sports right now. So I am all over the place with her.
Because you're going practice to practice, game to game.
I don't usually get to the practices. Grandma handles that, but I do go to the games, of course. And really, it's about when I have free time, what do they want to do? On a weekend, we go to playgrounds, we go to slime kitchens, whatever it is that can entertain them. They are who fill my cup. They are who make everything else, kind of worth it. Because
does being a mom affect how you look at things as DA? What is the relationship there?
Yes. I often use analogies for doing this job and being a parent. Every day as a parent, you really work to, when your kid does something that they shouldn't have done, to get your point across that they can't continue with that behavior, but not be too harsh, right? Still have them understand we love you. You're still a part of our family. You're still
if
a
you know
good
how to do
person.
I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. Teach me how to do okay. That sounds good.
But you also can't be too lenient because then they'll just keep doing that bad thing. So you're always trying to figure out what is that sweet spot that kind of gets my point across and leads them towards their productive future. It's the same thing as a prosecutor. I don't want to be too harsh. We should not be too harsh. We can't be too lenient either because we still need to have accountability and get the point across. But you're struggling every day for each individual person that you prosecute to figure out what is the sweet spot for you, right? That gets you back on track towards a productive life. And any prosecutor who tells you that the job is easy shouldn't be doing it because they're not doing it correctly. Any parent that tells you parenting is easy probably isn't getting it right. And so a lot of times that's the way that I try to relate it to people because it's very similar. But no, that's being a mom has truly, I think, made me a better prosecutor.
Okay. Well, and any recommendations, if you have out-of-town visitors, they're coming to the city, hidden gems, places you go as a parent. I need things to occupy my kids on the weekends. Anything that is a go-to for you in the city that you appreciate about San Francisco?
Yes. So I would, if you have kids, say go to Tunnel Tops.
Okay,
It
sure.
is phenomenal, beautiful views of the Golden Gate Bridge. They've got, if it's the summer, they've got water spraying out of things, playgrounds.
Bring the change of clothes.
Bring the change of clothes,
yes,
all
yes.
of that. But it's great. If you're looking for a good burrito in this city, go to La Taqueria in the Mission. They have the best burritos in this city, in my opinion. I go there often, sometimes multiple times a week. So those are my 2 recommendations.
Okay, and final question is, what would you, if you had the ability to, enact any change as district attorney, you could do anything. One thing that would make the most impact for the city, but it's within reason. It's you can't change, the entire system at once, but in a day. But you had the power to just do one thing that you think would get us closer back to the city we want it to be. What would that be?
I love when I get questions that keep me to one answer. If we're talking about quickly solving the problems that I need to solve as the DA, then I would have to say more police, right? Because we need them to be more effective at deterring crime. And sadly, right now, we need their presence most of the time to be able to do that. If I kind of step outside of that, the right here and right now solution, then I think it always comes back to our investment really in our schools. And I think we need to make up some groundwork when it comes to early education in this city. As a parent, it's obviously something very important to me, and I think we've got to prepare people to succeed in our city. And it starts with their foundation, right? And I think we've had a number of issues with that lately in a lot of ways, teachers being paid, stuff with the school board, like all kinds of things that I think we have to get back to the basics of giving people the tools in our city to succeed.
Well, and this idea of to be a great city or a great society or a great community, there has to be social mobility, meaning just because of where you're born and your station in life does not determine where you end up. So if we believe in that, and if we believe in those values, it's not only how we deal with crimes and lawlessness, but it's also there has to be a ladder, a way up, and we have to commit to that to be great. I think.
We can't just say it; we have to do it. Right? We love to proclaim, right, these values that we have here as a city. But when we look at the implementation, is it real? Right? What's behind the words? And you're right. If people feel hopeless, if I'm a child who feels hopeless, by the time I get to 15, what do I have to lose when I'm offered the idea of going to go rob somebody for their Rolex watch? I have nothing to lose because I'm hopeless that there is any social mobility.
And you feel like, this whole system is against me anyways. Why should I have to play by the rules unless there's an alternative?
And so I tell people all the time, public safety at its core is preventing crime in the first place. It's not the system's response to the crime after it happens. It's less victims. And the only way we create fewer victims, is to give people the hope that they need to feel like my life is headed somewhere, and committing this crime or doing this drug isn't for me. And I just think we still have a long way to go in San Francisco, in a number of communities across San Francisco, to get people to that place of hope.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Brooke Jenkins, San Francisco District Attorney, running for re-election in November. And thank you so much for your insights. It's going to be an interesting race and an interesting future for San Francisco. And thank you for all of your contributions.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is a great conversation.